I'll tell you why, because I think you're the greatest guitarist of all time, and I love you, and I think you're...
Segovia might disagree.
Yeah, but...
Have you ever wondered how many of those rock and roll rumors are true? Join us as we explore the life of Keith Richards and uncover rumors about him that turned out to be true, from stories of trying to snort his father's ashes to staying up for 9 days. There's just something about Keith Richards, with the fact that he was one of the most influential guitarists in history, and also a member of the iconic band the Rolling Stones. But one thing is sure, when it comes to going extreme, be sure to find Richards doing the most insane and craziest things. Keith Richards made international headlines in 2007 when he was asked during an interview about the strangest thing he had ever snorted. In response, he mentioned his father, saying that he had snorted his father. According to him, his father was cremated, and he just couldn't resist grinding him up with a little bit of blow. He even went further to state that his father wouldn't have cared any bit, plus the ashes he snorted went down pretty well, and he's still alive. This particular comment came as a big shock to fans globally, and the story instantly took the media by storm. Considering how much attention his comment attracted, Richards' manager issued a statement saying that the comment he made was just a joke, although many people at that time didn't believe whatever his manager had to say to cover up. But it wasn't too long before the truth finally came to the open in Keith Richards' autobiography, Life. He mentioned that while he was trying to take the lid off of the box, a fine spray of his father's ashes blew out onto the table. So since he couldn't just brush the ashes off, he decided to wipe his finger over it and snorted the residue. This confirms what he had disclosed initially during the interview about the strangest thing he had snorted. Imagine not sleeping for 9 days straight. Well, this was one of the craziest things Keith did. Let's get into the details. There's no doubt that the iconic Rolling Stones guitarist is known for his wild lifestyle. He also confirmed this particular rumor that was centered on his ability to function with little or no sleep. Richards admits to recording the song Before They Make Me Run during a brutal 5-day recording session without sleeping. While speaking in an interview, Richards mentioned that adrenaline is the most amazing thing we have as humans. This was while he was making comments about the rumors. Indeed, his ability to go without sleep is almost beyond belief, although it was recorded that while the engineers took turns catching some rest, Richards allegedly stayed awake the entire 5 days. This wasn't all, as he even claimed to be awake for 9 days straight, although this only ended with a sudden blackout, which left him waking up in a pool of blood. For most of us, this sounds like a medical emergency, but for Keith Richards, it was just another day in the life of a rock and roll legend. According to him, he went 9 days without a wink. He also stated that when it got to a point, he fell asleep standing up eventually, and while he was just putting another cassette back on the shelf and was still feeling great at the time, he suddenly turned around and fell asleep. While falling, he fell against the edge of the speaker, only to wake up in a pool of blood. The funny thing was, when Richards woke up, he was wondering if the pool of blood was claret. For Keith Richards, if there's no shepherd's pie, then there's no show. Let's get on to the next rumor. Most fans have claimed that the 1989 Steel Wheels Tour was the Rolling Stones' biggest tour at that time. But as usual, Richards still likes things getting a bit off. While the band was in Toronto in December, the catering setup for the band was ready. By the time Richards arrived late to find that the shepherd's pie he had been looking forward to had been eaten, he refused to go on stage until another one was produced. Mick Jagger was extremely angry with Richards, considering how much time they had to waste. Eventually, the concert was still delayed until Richards got his special meal. According to him, it became famous among the band members that it's his rules on the road that nobody touches the shepherd's pie till he has been in there to eat from it. In 1977, Ronnie Wood's ex-wife Jo Wood remembers first encountering Richards in a Paris hotel room. According to her, Richards reached into his bag and took out a silver spoon, a bottle filled with substances, and a lighter, and in just a few seconds, he'd crushed some of the substances with a bit of water, cooked them up, then filled a syringe and took it straight through his shirt. It wasn't long after this had played out. Richards just smiled and looked up at her and said hello to her, also mentioning that he had heard so much about her. Joe also went further to mention how much she adores Richards because he and Ronnie were friends, especially the fact that he was naughty. But Richards' behavior tested even Joe at some point. On this particular occasion, they went for a baby shower, and Joe had initially asked Richards not to do substances in front of her mother. All of a sudden, Richards ignored her request, and immediately after dinner, he suddenly declared that it was time for dessert. With that announcement, he quickly pulled out a big bag of substances and slammed it on the table. Feeling extremely embarrassed by Richards' actions, Joe's mother quickly left the room. After that incident, Joe had to go explain to her mother that Richards had been doing it for years, and somehow she couldn't stop him, since that was just his way of life. The next rumor on the list seems to be one of the biggest rumors heard of Keith Richards. There's no doubt that Richards is one of the most enduring rock and roll legends. It was speculated that he tried getting a blood transfusion to get sober and beat substance use. According to the rumors, the Rolling Stones guitarist went to Switzerland in the early 70s to get clean by having the blood from his body entirely drained and replenished. Although there was no evidence or confirmation from him at that time, after some time, he later admitted that the rumors of him having all his blood cleaned out and replaced were false. He also went further to state that someone asked him how he cleaned up, so he told them he went to Switzerland and had his blood completely changed. While explaining, he mentioned that he was just fooling around, and that was all it was about, a joke. He also expressed how tired he was with answering that particular question always, so he had to give the media a story. But the rumors seem to have been from an actual 1973 incident, when Richards possibly underwent some manner of blood filtering treatment before Rolling Stones were about to embark on a European tour, according to a book called Up and Down with the Rolling Stones by Tony Sanchez, a former associate of Richards. As contained in the book, one of rock's great myths is that by the break of 1973, Keith Richards' blood had become so toxic that a specialist performed an experimental procedure in which the rock star had to trade all of his contaminated blood for some clean pints. The procedure was necessary to allow toxic substances to be removed from his body, so they wouldn't do further damage to his kidneys. Also, it was further alleged that Richards had to be put to sleep for a couple of days for the procedure to take place. The next rumor on the list almost cost Richards his life. There's no secret to the fact that Richards was known to be deeply involved in the use of substances. But what was his worst experience? During an interview, he mentioned that his most terrifying experience with substances was when someone put a pesticide, strychnine, in his substance. This particular incident took place in Switzerland. After he took in the substance, he was in a state of deep unconsciousness for a period of time. He also stated that he was able to listen to everyone as they were scared and yelling that he had passed on while waving their fingers and pushing him about. According to Richards, while this was going on, he was thinking of how he hadn't met his demise, yet probably he should be number one on the list of people who were likely to pass on for years. This wasn't the only instance where it was rumored that Richards almost lost his life. Let's take a look at the next incident. Richards has almost passed on many times, but there's one close call he mentioned during an interview, which he says is his most spectacular experience. This incident took place on the 3rd of December, 1965, while he was playing the last time in front of about 5,000 fans at the Memorial Auditorium in Sacramento, California. Stepping to the mic for his backup vocals, he noticed it was facing the wrong way and went to knock it with the neck of his guitar. All of a sudden, his guitar touched his microphone stand, and a flame shot out. Immediately, Richards dropped to the ground, unconscious. The shock also burnt his guitar strings. Promoter Jeff Hewson thought Richards had been shot. They saw Richards fly into the air backward. They even thought he had passed on. It turns out Richards had been shocked by the electrical surge from the mic, and immediately, he was carried out with oxygen tubes and rushed to the hospital. Richards later laughed as he recalled hearing a doctor in the hospital say that he might either wake up or not. By the next night, he was back on stage, and he even credited his survival to his brand new rubber-soled boots, which he claimed must have halted the electrical charge. Have you ever come across the rumors that Keith Richards was imprisoned? Let's get into the details. On the 18th of July, 1972, the band Rolling Stones was to appear at a concert in Boston, but were faced with a troubling situation involving Keith Richards and Mick Jagger. They both got arrested for engaging in a physical disagreement with a photographer in Rhode Island, and were arrested. At that time, Mayor Kevin White had something different in mind to do with the rock stars, other than just keeping them locked up. He had them released into his custody so the show could go on. Many applauded him, saying he did what any good politician would do. While speaking, the mayor mentioned that the Stones had been busted, but he had sprung them. As a result of this incident, he probably became the most loved mayor in the history of that city. How about when Richards was a member of the Boy Scout? Let's take a look at a particular incident that happened during his time there. Growing up as a teenager, Richards spent 2 years in the Boy Scouts. However, this short time in public service ended just after he smuggled a couple of bottles of whiskey into a jamboree and found himself engaging in fights and strong arguments with fellow members. While that was going on, other teenagers followed in the same path. Afterwards, there were a couple of fights that went down between Richards and some guys. According to him, he mentioned that they were only able to find out about the fight that had taken place just after he went to slug one guy, but hit the tent pole instead. As a result, he broke a bone in his hand. A few weeks later, he mistreated a recruit and was eventually expelled. There's no doubt that Richards has been wild even as a young child. The next rumor about Keith Richards that seems to be true happened during a vacation. In 2006, Richards fell out of a palm tree while he and Ronnie Wood were climbing during a vacation with their families. It was a private island off Fiji. This was just after an afternoon swimming with Ronnie Wood. He perched himself on a tree that was about 7 feet off the ground. As he tried to jump off the tree to go get lunch, he slipped and hit his head on the trunk. At the time when the incident happened, Richards didn't feel any serious pain until a few days later, when he suffered from a blinding headache while on a boat ride. That night, he had 2 seizures in his sleep, and his wife, Patty, had to call for medical attention. After traveling on a 4-hour flight to Auckland, New Zealand, he was operated on by neurosurgeon Dr. Andrew Law due to a blood clot in his brain. He spent 3 weeks at the hospital in New Zealand, and 6 weeks after the fall, he was back on tour with the band. According to Richards, he woke up feeling great and asked Dr. Law when he was going to start the procedure. Law, in response, told him that it was all done. Although the rumors first said it was a 40-foot tree, Richards later revealed that the tree was not more than 7 feet, stating that his wet hands caused him to slip from a branch. By 1971, there were rumors that Richards was involved in a fire incident. Let's get into the details. Sometime in 1971, Richards and his girlfriend, Anita Pallenberg, almost met an untimely end during the making of the band's studio album, Exile on Main Street. During one of the sessions, which was mostly recorded at Richards' rented Villa Nelcot in the south of France. Richards and Pallenberg were deeply caught in the web of substance use at this time, and before this particular incident, it was more like a custom that Richards would once in a while pass out, sometimes with the needle still in his arm. But this time, it was a lit substance that was in his hand. Immediately, the beds went up in flames. Richards and Pallenberg woke up just in time to escape before being burned to ashes. This particular incident was still not the only time he got involved in a fire incident. Sometime in 1973, given his habit of nodding off while burning substances to inhale, it was alleged that Richards set his Redlands estate ablaze. Many people claim that one of Richards' still burning substances was to be blamed again, but in his autobiography, he claimed otherwise. Richards writes that the fire was caused by a mouse that ate through the wiring. Regardless, the fire spread to the home's thatched roof as Richards, Pallenberg, and their kids ran to safety. But then, he returned to drag the most expensive possessions out of the house. There are famous photos that document the aftermath, including one where Richards was sitting on the lawn on top of a stroller. Guess what he was doing? Inhaling substances, of course. The next rumor on the list is An incident occurred in 1976 when he fell asleep in the car with his 7-year-old son, Marlon, in the back seat. After the incident, he got arrested. During the process, he tried explaining to them that no one is perfect. During this time, the guitarist had been driving back from a gig in Nebworth, England, and plowed his Bentley into a tree. In his autobiography, he recalled that even until 5 or 6 years ago, there were still traces of bloody handprints on the back seat and dent on the dashboard. Richards, who was arrested when the police later found substances in his jacket, wrote that at least he didn't hit anybody. For the next rumor, Richards got caught in the act. During the period of 1966, Richards purchased Redlands Estate in Sussex, England for $20,000. A few months later, the estate became the site of one of the 60s most infamous substance busts, with about 20 cops descending on the home in search of these substances. Richards, Jagger, and Marianne Faithfull, who were all coming down from a day-long trip, were also caught in the raid. According to Richards, he mentioned that there was a knock on the door, and then he had to look out the window and saw a whole lot of dwarves outside. This was the first time he was getting busted. It was later revealed that the police had been tipped off by a tabloid paper that had been tipped off by Richards' driver. Immediately, the rumor went out that the police had interrupted a group activity where Jagger had been licking a Mars candy bar pushed into Faithfull's body. Richards had politely answered the door, and the police had to meet a scene that Faithfull later called pure domesticity. As for Richards and Jagger, they were both brought up on charges related to substance use and received brief prison sentences that were eventually overturned. According to Richards, how the Mars bar got into the story is something he can't explain. Next on the list is... Everyone was aware of the fact that Richards was deeply into the use of substances, and a few times he has been arrested due to these substances. But this particular incident topped them all and even threatened to derail the Rolling Stones at their peak. In February 1997, the Canadian cops found roughly an ounce of substances in Richards' hotel room. Charged with possession for transporting and looking at a potentially lengthy prison term, Richards posted bond and tried getting a special visa, permitting him to undergo an experimental cure in the US. By the time his case came up, in October 1978, there were 500 to 600 people outside every time he turned up in court, chanting, "Free Keith, free Keith." Richards was eventually found guilty, but walked away with it anyway. While he was out on bail, he was seen at a party with Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's young wife, Margaret, who was hanging out with the band at that time. His community service sentence was to play a benefit concert for the blind, devoted, sightless Rolling Stones fan, Rita, who pleaded on Richards' behalf. According to Richards, she begged for free rides to their shows and was fearless. He even went further to mention that the love and devotion of fans like Rita is something that still amazes him. Ever heard about what took place at the Playboy Mansion? Well, let's find out. This crazy incident occurred in 1972 on a tour stop in Chicago, when Richards and saxophonist Bobby Keys were invited to stay at the Playboy Mansion by Hugh Hefner. During the time they were there, it was nearly set ablaze while they were taking substances in a bathroom. All of a sudden, the premises became a bit smoky, and it wasn't long before they heard serious banging on the bathroom door. By the time they opened the door, Richards and Bobby were shocked to find waiters and guys in black suits bringing buckets of water. Those knocking on the door were also shocked to see them sitting on the floor. Although the house was saved, Hefner couldn't risk it, so he had to do a relocation. In 2014, an incident occurred when Richards appeared on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, where the host asked him about an infamous instance in which rock and roll legend Chuck Berry allegedly punched Richards in the face. While Richards was explaining, he stated that he was back in the dressing room and probably went up to collect money, and Chuck's guitar was laid out in its case. All of a sudden, Richards thought of just having a feel of it, and just when he picked it up and innocently strummed an E chord, Berry came in yelling at him, saying that nobody touches his guitar ever. Suddenly, he attacked Richards in the face. While speaking, Richards jokingly called what Chuck's did to be one of Chuck's biggest hits. To think that after all the substances and careless living, Richards was almost undone by a bunch of heavy books at the library. Let's find out what took place. Richards, on a few occasions, had explained how he was in his home library, standing on a chair to reach a book about Leonardo da Vinci's study of anatomy, when he slipped. Many weighty books found on the shelf came pouring down on top of him. The accident resulted in 3 broken ribs for Richards and a tour postponement for his band. According to Richards, this was one of those moments where you have to decide to either take it in the ribs or take a shot in the temple on the desk. The next rumor on the list occurred while Richards was still an infant. This incident took place in 1944, when Richards almost didn't make it out of infancy due to the Nazi raids over London. During the height of the raids, Richards and his mom evacuated to a region that was out of the line of fire. And just when things had gone down, they decided to return, only to find out that some of their neighbors had passed on and that baby Keith Richards' cot had been blown up. Richards confirmed this when he mentioned that Hitler had dumped one of his bangers on his bed, joking that he was after him. After decades of substance use, numerous arrests, and legendary insanity, the only way left for Richards to truly shock people was to settle down. Let's take a look at the details. By 1991, Richards moved with his wife Patty and their 2 young daughters from Manhattan to leafy Weston, Connecticut. While speaking about this new environment, he mentioned that the woods have a serenity about them that would suit the ancestral spirits, also mentioning how he enjoys his private surroundings and large library. In 2002, during an interview, he gave an account of his gentlemanly country life, saying that he gets up at 7 in the morning, does some reading, has a little sail around Long Island Sound if the weather is all right, does a lot of recording in his basement, and writes songs. He had no fixed routine that most times he would walk around the house, wait for the maids to clean the kitchen, and then mess it all up again and do some frying. A few times, he and Patty would go out once a week if there was something going on in town. With every single rumor about Keith Richards, from him snorting ashes to getting blood transfusions, it seems that nothing could be too far-fetched for this legendary guitarist. But beyond the rumors, Richards still stands as a symbol of a life lived without any form of apology. As he once said, "It's good to be here, and it's good to be anywhere." If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.